Power to the people. How's everybody doing? I have to tell you that, as I've said to most of you, or many of you before, that the Occupy movement, and especially as it reached Oakland, because, Oakland now has a reputation of being the most radical and progressive Occupy movement across the country. Maybe you don't know that, but people I talk to in New York and Georgia and other places absolutely respect what Occupy Oakland has done and the blood that you've already shed, what you have, And I think that the importance of the Occupy movement cannot be lost, and we can't allow ourselves to fall back because of whatever is going on, and we don't have the kind of movement that we want. Now, I want to just say, just quickly, when Dr. King, just before he was killed, talked about the question of where do we go from here, and that's the question I think we're facing right now. And one of the things that King said is that in order for us to know where we go from here, we have to talk about where we are now. And in that time, he spoke about black people, and I want to mention this because I wanted to show you the connections that are going on today. As I mentioned to many people, what the whole purpose of Dr. King, the activity that he was geared toward at the time of his assassination was the Poor People's Campaign, if you remember. And the Poor People's Campaign was to occupy, literally, the area around the White House and all throughout D.C., set up Tent City, which they did do, and say that we're not going until we get what's ours. Now, that was a powerful statement. Now, in addressing that question, Dr. King said, where do we go from here? Well, we look and we see black people, we see that we, despite the Civil Rights Act and all the legislation, we have half of what is good and double of what is bad. And that the White House and the government is going to have to change that condition. And so what we're going to Washington, D.C., at the time he said in 1968, 67, and then 68, what is ours is we want guaranteed income. We don't have jobs, so we want a guaranteed income, and we know the government can provide it because the government is spending all the money in the world on war that has nothing to do with us, and we want that defense budget shifted so we can all, if we can't get a job, we want guaranteed income. But what we ultimately want, Dr. King said, and people don't remember this, we want a total redistribution of the wealth of this nation. If you remember, when he started talking about redistribution of wealth, Dr. King was mowed down like a dog in Memphis, Tennessee. And if anybody thinks James Earl Ray was the assassin, then I got some other stories to tell you about this government. Now, I say that to say because at the same time, the Black Panther Party was talking about the liberation of black people. But what we recognize is that while we had a subjective goal in our own interest, that our goal could not be achieved and we were not on moral or ethical ground if we talked about the liberation of black people in the context of the oppression of the native people. So we said we can't be free as long as the native people are oppressed, so we said we formed a coalition with American Indian Movement, AIM. Leonard Peltier, free Leonard Peltier today. We said, how are we going to talk about the freedom of black people in the context of the oppression of the Latinos that are working the farms of California like the slaves in Georgia? We said we can't be free, so we helped to form a coalition with the Brown Berets. And what about the Puerto Ricans and others working the fields, the industrial fields of New York and living in poverty? We said we can't talk in Chicago, so we helped to form a coalition with the Young Lords organization. And what about the Chinese and the Asians? We formed a coalition with the Red Guards. And what about half the world, women? We said, how can we talk about black liberation in the context of the oppression of women? And so we said that women's liberation was a part of our agenda. And what about gays? We were the only black organization, matter of fact, the only progressive organization that saw the question of gay liberation as a part of the revolutionary struggle that we were engaged in. We said, what about the people who are disabled? And we formed a coalition with the Center for Independent Living. And what about the messed up environment in this country and how we're all subject to the horrors of that environment? So we formed a coalition with the Center for with the Trust for Public Land and created a program of gardens in the ghetto. And what about our brothers and sisters that were in Vietnam fighting against the same oppressor that we had? We didn't call for peace in Vietnam, we called for victory for the Viet Cong. We said, what about our brothers and sisters that were fighting against the same imperial empire in South Africa? We said we formed a coalition with the PAC. And we said, what about in Zimbabwe? We formed a coalition with ZANU. And what about about in Mozambique, and we formed a coalition with Frelimo. Now I say all that to say that one of the things that the Occupy movement has inspired me is that it has reached beyond the question of one group versus another. We don't have any conflict. We know who the common enemy is. And that enemy you have identified in language that everyone around the world now identifies with, and that's the 1%. Yeah. We understand one thing, that the rest of us are the 99%. So the question is, what are we going to do and where do we go from here? And I want to remind you of something that made you who you are and us who we are as I joined in and lent my voice to what you already started in Oakland. Glad to walk the clothes down the Port of Oakland. Tell me they lost $4 to $8 million that day. I was like, oh, you had $8 million? That's $8 million right now. We won't close nothing down if we start having some profit sharing and some redistribution of wealth around here. But yes, let's shut it down every day that we're not getting a dime out of that. 5 schools closing only need $2 million to reopen and $8 million a day. Give me a break. So what has the Occupy movement done? It's done what we used to say was quoting one of the great revolutionary minds and leaders of this world, Che Guevara. We would always say, words are beautiful. You know, everybody wants to rap around here lately. I get tired of rapping. But anyway, everybody got to rap with some kind of peace. Words are beautiful, but actions are supreme. What makes Occupy distinct from every other thing that's been here since the days of the Black Panther Party is you have put words into action. And you have created an environment for change and for the kind of change that some people thought Obama was bringing, which is a sad story that you didn't get that bill. But anyway, you're here now, we're here now, and what I want to say is that actions are supreme. It's when we come together to develop an agenda on where do we go from here. Let's remember that what makes you distinguished from everyone else is that you took action. If we didn't all agree on every single thing, we agreed about one thing. We knew we were a part of the oppressed group and we were united against our oppressors, the 1%, the capitalists. This cannot be a capitalist movement. We can't tolerate that. We already know this is anti-capitalist because there's no way that you're going to have this kind of continuum of exploitation and talk about real change in America. We may not agree on every ideology. There are people talk about nonviolence versus violence as though this is a serious question when it's not a serious question. And the reason it's not serious because, first of all, when we talk about guns and picking up guns as we did in the Black Panther Party, we said a gun is not necessarily revolutionary because the pigs have guns. The pigs meaning the state, the police, the government of the United States, and all that it represents, which is the corporations and so forth. They have more guns than we can even imagine having. So violence is already here. The NRA alone is perpetrating more violence than the average person. So we don't have the question of violence and nonviolence. We have a question of, do we want to take some actions and do we want to make them meaningful? When people, I think it was, what was it, 28th of, was it January? 28th of January, and I was out here in the streets, and I saw people took over a building, and I only felt that maybe strategically there were a few mistakes made, and maybe we could have held the line better. We could talk about strategies. But I love taking over that building. I used to be the Oakland Auditorium, and we used to have a whole lot of things going on in Oakland Auditorium. The bottom line is this. People said, oh, look, the occupied people are violent. This in the face of talking about bringing every troop in the world down on people just because of the nonviolent protest against the Port of Oakland and its wealth and its exploitation. I watched a young girl on a bicycle get mowed down by the police. Yep. And I watched a black cop and a woman cop, and I asked both of them, I said, how the hell do you stand up here when we done fought for you for women's liberation and black liberation, and this is what you did with it? I said, you're not my brother, you're not my sister. So we have to be clear about what we're doing and not be afraid or ashamed to say, oh, well, we're not violent and we have to explain. We don't have anything to explain. We're doing the right thing. So all I want to say to you now in closing is that I'm a part of you and I feel a part of this movement. I know I talk to different people around the country who've been in the movement many years, and some of us who are tired of being alive and thought it was all over but the shouting. And then came the shouting, and then came Occupy, and it gave us and reinvigorated us. I didn't have any problem. I'll be 70 in March. I walked like I was 12 years old walking around there to close that damn port. And so bottom line is this. You guys are leaders. You can bring other people into this, but the way we're going to do that is you're going to have to take some actions again. That doesn't mean we get killed. It doesn't mean we get beat up. We have to find some better actions and some more strategic actions. But the bottom line is that's who you have become. You've got the world is recognized you. The world has recognized Occupy Oakland specifically. So we'll be proud. Global. Let's say Let's join together, let's keep this going, and let's remember the power belongs to the people. All power to the